Subscribe now.
Hi, everyone.
Hey, everybody.
Good evening. Welcome to the Bigfoot Influencers Podcast. My name is Tim Halloran. We are so thrilled and happy that you're joining us for this episode, and just really excited to be here with this episode number 5. And just happy to be here. And I will pass it over to my co-host and let her say hello.
Hey, guys. I'm Dana Halloran. I'm super excited to have you here. So we're just going to do a little intro and just talk about what's going on. And what's going on right now is what's going on with your T-shirt, Tim.
Oh, so my T-shirt, a little shout out to Brian King Sharp. So Brian is one of our. He's on the Untold Radio Network AM podcast, or the YouTube and podcast group. He has a show called Weird Encounters. So just suggest everyone go check it out. He's got some really cool stories he shares through the YouTube channel. But he also has Paranormal Odyssey podcast network, which this is the Sasquatch Odyssey T-shirt, which I listen to his episodes every week on there too. So just go check him out.
We need to get our T-shirt.
Yeah, we will work
Can
on
we
that.
get like a Bigfoot influencers T-shirt?
Maybe. Hey, Doug, Alex, if you're Doug and Alex, if you're watching this, we need a T-shirt.
We need a T-shirt. You know what I'm super excited about?
What's that?
I'm super excited about having Carlos on our show tonight.
Oh my gosh, yeah.
Carlos Jimenez. He's like a super cool dude.
He is.
He's a scientist. As a matter of fact, he's an actual anthropologist, to be specific. And he might not be a household name in the Bigfoot communities, but he's been involved in research in the subject for many years. He actually studied under Dr. Grover Krantz.
Mm-hmm.
And I know, I just want to make that connection between Dr. Grover Krantz and the everyday people, because you're probably like, who's Grover Krantz? So Tim, why don't you go ahead and explain to everybody who he is?
Sure. So Dr. Grover Krantz is what was known as one of the 4 horsemen of Bigfoot. And for those who are maybe new to this, there was a group of early researchers, and they were noted as the 4 horsemen of Bigfoot. And Dr. Grover Krantz was the academic part of that. So he was an anthropologist. He was there's a couple
he
other.
He was a professor.
Right. Yep, Washington State. We're going to talk about that. Carlos will talk about that tonight.
Mm-hmm.
But he was definitely one of the few that publicly talked about this, but he was the main person after, and there's some others, but he was the academic face of Bigfoot research back in the early, when the early researchers were around. And then interesting enough, what happened is he passed the baton down to Dr. Jeff Meldrum. So they're close to. Once we have Dr. Jeff on the show, we'll talk a little bit about that. But I'm just thrilled. Carlos has an intimate relationship with him. And we're going to talk to Carlos a little bit about Dr. Grover Krantz before we get into what Carlos is doing as well.
So, Carlos seems super cool. I'm super excited.
Hey, wait a minute. Before that, I'm sorry.
Oh, what's that?
Look, so here's Dr. Krantz's one of his. This is version 2 of his book, and most researchers and influencers will, when they're talking to new researchers in this, there's a few books that you have to start with, and this is one of them. So it's if everyone can't, for our podcast listeners, it's Bigfoot Sasquatch Evidence by Dr. Grover S. Krantz.
When did he write that?
In the 90s.
Yeah.
I think, yeah. Unfortunately, he passed away, in the early 2000s. So he was unfortunately unable to solve the mystery, but he did lay the pathway for many of the scientific and non-scientific. Just he laid the pathway on the academic portion of this, of what for the interest of this phenomenon.
So basically, to you, those of who are new into the world of Bigfoot and interested in what's going on, Dr. Grover Krantz was doing this for years and years and years ago, this phenomenon of Bigfoot. And he was like a real scientist, an anthropologist who wrote a book about this. And I'm sure when we have Carlos on, he's going to get more into detail about what Dr. Krantz was doing, and also what Carlos is doing currently.
100%.
Yep.
So without further ado, we're going to pull Mr. Carlos Jimenez into the studio.
Hey, Carlos.
Let me pull you off mute. Sorry.
Yeah.
There you go. Now you should be able to
Everybody,
talk. How are you doing?
pretty good. How's everyone out there?
Yeah,
Hopefully
we're
well.
doing good
Oh, doing
here.
good.
We're doing good. So where are you, Carlos?
I'm in Crescent City, California. We've got
Okay.
a house right at the base of the Redwood Forest, actually a stone's throw from Jedediah Smith State Park. So we're pretty close to the mouth of the Smith River, the Jedediah Smith River. And the research area that I've been working in since 2019 is up in the, I'll call it the foothills, but it's pretty much up kind of getting into the mountains above Gasky, California, which is here in Del Norte County, California. There's 3 counties that border Oregon. We're the coastal county.
Oh, okay.
Oh my gosh, you're so far away from us because we're all the way on the East Coast.
The other ocean.
But how cool would it be to be where he is?
Right. Well, Carlos is used to the East because he grew up in Pennsylvania.
Oh my gosh, he did. So can you describe to everybody the area in Pennsylvania that you grew up in?
Yeah, I'm from a little town. Well, I say I'm from a little town. I was born in Meadville, Pennsylvania.
Okay.
Which, let me see, is that showing up like the state, the shape of the state this way?
Yeah, it's close enough. We'll figure it out.
So is it like
here,
northeast,
right
northwest?
by lake, close to Lake
yeah,
Erie.
that's good.
We're in the chimney of Lake Erie. We were equidistant from Cleveland, Buffalo, and Pittsburgh, basically. Just a few hour drive to Niagara Falls.
So how far away are you from like Ohio?
Ohio border. Well, I had a sister that lived right on the border in Linesville, and there's a big lake called Pymatuning Lake out there,
Okay.
where my young brother just a year ago had an encounter. But that's right on the border, so I want to say 20 minutes. 20
Oh my
minutes.
gosh, yeah, that's super close.
Yeah, Cleveland was 80 miles.
Okay.
From my hometown.
Yeah, that's close. Definitely close. I mean, Pennsylvania, Ohio, they're both big states, but
yeah,
you're definitely up in that northwest corridor, up near the lake. So that's super cool. So
yeah, the area I grew up in was the Appalachian foothills, essentially. Like when we lived in a village of Custards, and that was it was a marsh and woods, and that was pretty much what I knew growing up as a kid. We knew the marsh and the woods.
So what did you guys do? What kind of activities did you do as a kid?
Well, I mean, I was a 70s baby, so we were outside. If you were inside, you were told to go outside. The only thing you'd be inside for was chores if you had something to do. And most of my chores as the oldest son were outdoors, whether it was chopping wood, stacking wood, shoveling snow, raking leaves, painting something, cutting the grass.
Lawn.
Yep. Yep. Long before you can drive a vehicle, you're pushing a 4-wheeler around the yard that had a blade on it.
Right.
Cut the grass.
So what kind of student were you?
Well, I'd like to think I was a good student. Hopefully, maybe there's some of my teachers out there that could speak to that. But I liked I liked learning. I mean, I was a student that liked to learn. I wouldn't say that I loved school. I was in the 70s. They called us Type A personalities, but nowadays, I'm diagnosed with ADHD. So, hyperactive.
It all begins with an A.
Sit up straight. In Sunday school, I would get my knuckles rapped for any number of things that I was probably not doing or doing wrong or shouldn't have been doing. But no, I'd say I was a pretty good student. I took my academics seriously, and then by junior high and high school, I tried to be involved in a lot of outdoor activities, sports. Especially, I really enjoyed being a member of sports teams. And in my adult life, most of my adult life has been spent as an educator and a coach. So a lot of what I enjoyed.
What is your sport, Carlos? What is your big sport?
Well, big sport. The one that I coached the longest was aquatics, swimming and diving. Most recently, New Road School. Shout out to my swimmers and divers down there. But yeah, no, I coached Division I at the University of Wyoming, some divers, and for years, and then I coached several high school teams and clubs. I had a club in Wyoming, and I had a club in Southern California. So yeah, I've been involved with aquatics, but I was a wrestler. I played football. I did track and field. I was a pole vaulter, long jumper. Whatever. I like to do it all. If I could have, I would do it. I would have done every sport.
So you're a natural athlete.
I like sport.
You can like swim, you can run,
Right.
you can throw a ball.
And I assume in Wyoming they had an indoor pool, right?
Oh yeah, yeah, definitely. And I used to joke when I would recruit divers that because in Division I in University of Wyoming is part of the Western Athletic Conference, and then became part of the Mountain West Conference. And tower diving, like during my tenure, tower diving became something that was a competition in our conference. And the only tower we had at that time was Devil's Tower. So I used to use that as a selling point. If you're not familiar with Devil's Tower, it's the mountain from Close Encounters of the Third Kind that they're making out of mashed potatoes. So I used to joke that was the only tower. Now, luckily, actually this year I've been back, and the program up there has grown and become quite successful in the time since I've been there. And they actually have a high school that has a tower in it, which is incredible. And I'm just really excited. Shout out to Coach Tom Hudson and the other coaches and swimming people that were involved in getting that to happen. That's in the city of Laramie, Wyoming. The University of Wyoming is in Laramie, Wyoming.
Wow. So you're an anthropologist, correct?
Yeah, that's my master's degree. Undergraduate at Pomona College was in anthropology, and my master's degree that I started at Washington State and ended up finishing at the University of Wyoming was also in anthropology, with the focus in physical anthropology, biological anthropology.
Gotcha. We're going to get into that a little more, but really, what made you decide to be an anthropologist? How did you get into it?
Well, I mean, I was the first in my family to go to college, so I went to college and thought I was going to be pre-med. And after 2 years of pre-med classes, the second year, two things happened. One, I lost my first patient. One of my rats died, and I realized that I couldn't handle that. And if I couldn't handle a rat dying, I didn't think I could handle something going bad with a patient. Too much emotion for that field. And in that same semester, I started to take an anthropology class with Dr. James McKenna, and it was Intro to Physical Anthropology. And in that class, by maybe the third week, it was definitely early on that semester, he was talking about Gigantopithecus and Bigfoot in a college class. And you want to talk about snapping to attention, whatever my ADHD was at the time, I'll never forget. Boing, what? And I remember like running up at the end of that lecture to catch him before he ran off, and asking about it and getting him to let me do my undergraduate thesis on Bigfoot.
So is that when and how you got involved in the subject of Bigfoot?
That's when and how I got re-involved.
Okay, because you were involved
Well, back in Pennsylvania in my childhood, I had an encounter when I was a child, coming home from a friend's house out there by the Geneva Marsh. And I never told anyone about it. It was a secret that stayed with me until college, before I started to talk to my college friends and others about it. Even my own siblings didn't know, because I was afraid. And because I had made a promise to one adult who I had trusted to go out and look at what I look for evidence at the place where I'd had an encounter. So I didn't know what it was, and so to fast forward, I was 8, 9 years old. I think I've tried to recalculate it. When you get into your 50s, it's a little bit harder to remember exactly when.
Yeah, we're right there with you.
So for, the skeptics out there, I'm sorry, I can't help you. It's just the reality of getting old. But I know that it was the 70s, either 1979 or 1980. I know it was the summertime because I was out late, and I wouldn't have been out late on a school night like that. And I was walking home from a friend's house, and it was warm. And, those are the things that I can remember. And of course, there was a certain amount of, starlight, moonlight that I can remember, but I couldn't tell you what phase the moon was in or anything like that. But that experience, notwithstanding who I told or didn't tell, stuck with me. I started to, go to the library, and try to find.
What was the experience, Carlos?
Well, I had my first encounter with something that I'd never seen or even really heard of before. Walking home from a friend's house, I ran into the smell. I got the hair standing up on the back of my neck. I froze. I actually had a toy, and this also kind of places me trying to figure out what year was it, because I had a toy blaster from Star Wars. Like had three. I remember it took the C batteries, had a thing that spun around, and when you pulled the trigger, it went. Wee, 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 wee.
Yes.
And I was
my
holding
brothers
that,
had those. Yeah.
walking back from my buddy's house. I didn't have the Han Solo blaster. I had one of the Stormtrooper. It was one of those guns, but I had that in my hand, and that smell hit like a wall. Some people describe it differently, but for me, it hit like a wall. I've never smelled it since. I've had other encounters since then, but that was the one time where I smelled it, and it was rotten. It was wet dog, even like a little bit sulfury to me as a kid, like rotten eggs.
I hear that, yeah.
Then I panicked. I mean, I was, again, I don't know. I was a kid, but
so you were having an experience of, like, we have our 5 senses and we have all kinds of experiences. So you were having like a smelling experience as well as other senses being engaged.
The first one was smell, and then that's when I noticed that everything was quiet. And again, in the summer, we've got cicadas, we've got katydids, we got crickets, all kinds of stuff, frogs, especially to my right. I was on a dirt road coming back from a friend's house, and at the top of that dirt road was a place where as kids we would go and swim because there was a little waterfall, and then the waterfall would lead to a creek. The creek ran through my yard where we lived, but also ran from where I was at the moment down through a farmer's pasture, dairy farm, then through our yard, and then after our yard, it emptied into the swamp, Geneva Marsh. And to the right of me, though, at that time was this little creek, but it had, eroded down and kind of mostly like a steep kind of alley and with forest on, all through that. But there was a pathway that led down that we would take from this road, but it was a little bit ahead of me. So where I stopped, I wasn't at the pathway, but I was close to where that pathway led down. And so I couldn't see anything to my right or left. And to the left, you could see there was an open field and a little bit of trees. I didn't see anything there. But again, everything got quiet, and I wasn't really like looking around, but I sensed something to my right, whatever that means.
Sensed something?
I will just say that.
So we're talking about your 6th sense.
If there's
like your gut instinct.
It was some kind of, it felt like to me, there's something off to my right. Like some part of my brain.
That's your 6th sense.
Was telling me that, but that's when I pulled the trigger on that stupid toy gun.
Oh my God.
Because I panicked, because the feeling that I got with that sense that there was something there wasn't that there's a bear over there, because we had black bear. It wasn't that there was a deer standing over there. That smell was, again, something I'd never smelled before or since. And I pulled that trigger, and that noise went off.
Right.
And that's when, probably 10 feet to my right, and then going straight down into that ravine, it sounded like a truck full of cement was breaking every branch and knocking trees over to the bottom, away from me, which was, now fast forward, I know what a bluff charge is. I've learned. I didn't know anything about that back then, but it was weird because it wasn't charging towards me. It was like charging away from me. So that doesn't fit for me, as a scientist. Now it's an outlier in terms of what a bluff charge is supposed to be, but the sound was the same and the result was the same. There were the next day I would find the broken branches and a couple of down trees. But as I stepped forward, at that point, then I unfroze. I heard this thing. Probably another moment or two went by, and I slowly walked up to look down that path to see if I could see anything, because to my right, I couldn't see anything. It was just darkness. It was so thick. And as I looked down in that little, like, cleared pathway at the bottom, you could see the creek, and this thing stepped out into that creek and just paused for a moment.
So you had a visual. I
can't tell if it turned and looked at me, but I saw something 7+ feet tall, the silhouette of it. And I could see the top of the head and shoulder area, but it wasn't like the head was sticking up like it had a neck. That was the weird part for me, was that I didn't see ears. I didn't see a snout. I saw arms, legs, something that looked like a really big, hairy person. But,
and you all were used to bear out there.
Yeah, I mean, we've got bear, and it was on 2 legs. I mean, the problem for me was all of it, like the smell, the sounds. I mean, what could break branches and make that much noise? I honestly thought when I pulled that trigger that I scared a bear, and that it was like, oh, it was falling down in my kid brain. It was like, oh, a bear just fell down the hill. and I better let me go forward and take a look down at it. And that's
Wow.
when I really panicked, because now I'm seeing something that's not a bear. Now I'm seeing something that's nothing I've ever seen before. I hadn't seen that thing in a book. I'd never seen the Patterson-Gimlin film, never seen Boggy Creek, any of those things. And so here's this thing that's not anything that I'm even registering.
Right.
And
I think when you have like an experience like what you've had, where it's not just auditory, it's not just smelling, it's hearing, it's seeing, it
was all
smelling, it's having that sixth sense of something's off. You had like a full sensory experience.
And then I ran like hell.
Yeah.
I mean, in my brain, I think I was on my big toes, and that was the only part of my feet that were hitting the ground all the way home. And it was a good close to a mile from there down this dirt road, and then another cement road. And then there was a 2-lane, 55 mile an hour, like highway that ran right in front of my house. And I ran. And that night I stared through those, like my window with the curtains, because we had a floodlight, and the big floodlight. I don't know if people are familiar with that, because I don't know. There's some parts of the country where people know what a floodlight is. And
we have
a
floodlight.
Yeah. We had a big floodlight down in the corner of the yard, down by that creek, and at the wood line. I would cut the grass down to that floodlight, and it was kind of at the angle of the yard. But I stared at that wood line that whole night until there was light that came up, and then that's when I went over to the dairy farmer who lived between where I was and where we lived, because I knew he'd be up early, and I knew he had guns, and we used to shoot crows and groundhogs, so this dairy cows wouldn't get their legs broken when we were little, and do hay and stuff like that. But at any rate,
so you went to the dairy farmer who had guns because you felt like
I was terrified. I didn't know what it was.
Gonna protect you.
I didn't trust. At that time, I had a stepfather. I didn't trust him, and I didn't. And my mother wasn't, a person who I felt like could deal with that. So I went to him, and he thought I was, okay, whatever, just come back. Like, no, I need you to come down. I remember really being like trying to drag him, and then at first he was just going to come. He had his boots on. He's like, I got chores to do. It was morning. It was time to milk the cows and stuff.
Right.
He's like, I'll help you when I come back, but come on, I need you to see this. And we started to leave, and he didn't grab. I said, grab your gun. You got to grab a gun. I really distinctly remember him finally like giving in to come with me, but then not picking up a gun. And I was like, I didn't say it, but I know my brain was like, that's why I came to get you, because I need someone with a gun or something, because I don't know what this thing is. And we walked up that creek, and we found footprints, and we found the broken branches and trees. Not every tree was down. It sounded like there'd be like a pathway where a car would have gone, but there were broken branches, and there were some, trees, about that big around, broken down. And, again, my best guess, it was about 7 feet tall. At that time, I didn't measure. I wasn't a scientist. I was a kid, and he was a farmer. But he promised me, he said, you promised me you will never speak of this. And I promise you won't, I'll take care of this for her. And he did. I never saw that thing again. And I trusted that he had taken care of it, whatever that meant.
Right. Wow.
Kid brain. And
you definitely had like a once in a many lifetime experience, in my opinion.
I've spoken with some of my neighbors since then, and the ones that I grew up with, and some of them have had some, weird silences in the woods, but I don't know any yet. And I'm hoping maybe somebody else will come forward. But that was the only time in my whole childhood that I'd ever seen anything like that. Even in our county, I never heard anybody else having seen anything like that until, years later, when I was off in college, and then the years after that. So then all those years went by, and that's the thing. Like, I did do ordered books anytime there was a book about mysterious creatures or monsters. Okay. And so that's when I started to think, what? I think I know what I saw. I was pretty sure. And so I felt comfortable thinking, oh, that's weird. I don't know what it was doing here, because it lives out in California. There's one of them out there. Maybe that was the same one. It was on vacation or something. I don't know. Like, I didn't think that, but at that point I could put something to what I'd experienced. And I knew it wasn't just something that, I was a kid, and maybe had an imagination, but I never had imaginations, anything near that when I was a kid. So
I think what I'm coming to understand a little bit is, do you think that maybe Sasquatches present themselves to children more so than adults, because children and also women as well seem less threatening?
There certainly seems to be a lot of accounts, people's personal, stories that they've witnessed and lived and told. And there certainly seem to be a lot of them that involve children, especially, like as you said, female, young females, prepubescent, going early into puberty. But also, I'm thinking about the data now of the reports that I've taken, the reports that Krantz had, Dr. Green, and Sasquatch Chronicles, and lots of other people, Squatchometrics, and thinking about that data. Now I've become way more data driven. And so to your point, I think that you make a valid point. I certainly didn't know anything about any of that back then. And again, the first time I started to tell my story was to college friends who, of course, laughed at me and walked through the cafeteria joking like they were the Patterson Bigfoot. And, that if I just would have gone out down to it, I could have unzipped the suit. And, I got it. I get it.
Right.
And I certainly understood it. Obviously, I think that was a big part of being able to keep that secret, is seeing how people teased each other about anything growing up, knowing that there's no way I was ever going to be able to, prove what I'd encountered or seen and experienced.
So you just fast forward back into college. So who was Dr. James McKenna, and how did that impact you?
Yeah, in the interim, like I said, I started to get books. I checked in the library, and there were books out there. I found some old story books, and then there's stuff like, about the Himalayas and the abominable snowmen. And so I started to read specifically about these kinds of creatures, these hominids. And I started to learn. By end of high school, I had an idea of what cryptozoology was. And it was like an international society of cryptozoology. And I got a subscription to their little magazines.
So Carlos, explain to everybody, just like I'm trying to like connect everybody with like, what is cryptozoology, just for like the average person?
So again, I don't think it was anything until somebody coined the term crypto, meaning hidden or missing or unproven, and zoology, the study of animals. So hidden or missing animals, typically that means like things that we believe are extinct in the fossil record that we then find alive and they aren't extinct.
Or things that are legend.
Or things that are legend and lore that end up actually being not just legend and lore. As I'm sure the both of you and many of the people in the audience have heard, when you see or experience, well, especially when you see, but when you smell or hear these things, it's like they're coming off the pages of a mythological book. It's not supposed to be there. And again, I think
some things end up being real, like the giant squid, the volpe shot from Corsica. I mean, some things end up like they're like, it's a legend, it's talked about, but it ends up being like a real thing.
Well, and that's the, not to go too far off track, but the interesting piece of that is like 1898 was when the gorillas became real, because finally Livingston or someone, I presume, came across one, but the local people knew that they were real, had seen them, had talked about them, written about them, drawn them, I'm sure. And so it only became real for those of us in the West once somebody from the West documented, in some way. And then of course we were able to bring gorillas, put them in zoos. So that was easy. Bigfoot is a different.
Right. So that's what cryptozoology is. Cryptozoology is the study of things that haven't been necessarily officially documented. So, there are, besides just a Sasquatch, there are a lot of other animals, or cryptids, as they would call them,
across the whole spectrum. But of course, the ones that we're most interested in are the things that are higher up and more multicellularly evolved to be a term, an anthropology term that we use is anthropomorphic. Meaning like us, man-like, pomorphic, shaped like us, having 2 arms, 2 legs, standing upright, a head, 2 ears, 5 fingers, 5 toes. Things close to that are anthropomorphic, and those interest us more, I believe. Of course, we're interested though when they find these new horses in Mongolia that were supposed to not be around, or these coelacanth fishes that were supposed to be dead since the Devonian period, 65 million years ago. These things, of course, are interesting. Devonian is longer than that, but at any rate, So I get to college, and this professor, my sophomore year, is talking about Bigfoot, and it blew my mind. And I ended up starting a cryptozoology club at Pomona
Who
College.
was this professor?
Dr. James McKenna. His specialty was sudden infant death syndrome, SIDS. But he'd also done his advanced degree PhD was in physical anthropology. So he had done a lot of work with monkeys and apes, so our closest relatives. But then his forte, where his focus went during his years as a professor, was into the sudden infant death syndrome and studying things like mothers sleeping with their children sleeping alone, crib deaths, a lot detailed on he was more focused on that. But like I said, in his intro to physical anthropology class, he entertained and taught to us, different kinds of extinct, both, but extinct, human relatives, and talked about the Bigfoot, talked about how at that time in that publication that he had us reading for the class, Gigantopithecus was a plausible ancestor to these sightings of this creature. And so that hooked me. And during those 3 years, then, I switched departments from pre-med to anthropology, and he became my mentor. And
because Gigantopithecus, explain to everybody, where did Gigantopithecus come from, and give us a little bit of detail and history about Gigantopithecus.
I have one jaw here.
Uh-oh.
Okay.
Actually, I've got two. So there are a few jaws of this fossil ape. This is just a plaster cast that I made at Washington State. And this is the one that we called Gigantopithecus. This is an example of Gigantopithecus blackie.
And what region of the world, Carlos, was this?
And these jaws came from China, Southeast China.
Okay.
And then there was Gigantopithecus blasparensis, which is a little bit of a smaller one, but again, within that same time period. I think that they've now renamed this Indopithecus. I'd have to double check, but at the time, these were all examples of Gigantopithecus.
So what was Gigantopithecus to the average person? Explain it to us.
So all we have is jaws and several thousand teeth. And so as I did my, at that time, as an undergrad, I didn't do a lot of research on the teeth in detail other than just the basics. In graduate school, when I was working on my master's thesis for Dr. Krantz, then I went to the Smithsonian and got the papers from their library that were in Chinese, and I had to have translated. So there was, because again, a lot of this stuff was from China and India. But basically it's a fossil ape that lives at the time. The dates that I had were 300,000 up to a couple of million years ago. And so how does that relate to humans? Homo erectus, one of our ancestors, was living around that time. Homo sapiens, from the evidence that we had at that time, was about 200,000 years ago.
Okay.
So the Homo line, there was a chance that there was a crossover in Southeast Asia, at least, of these creatures, the fossil ones that were alive, because we have fossils showing that they were alive, and some of our ancestors, probably Homo erectus or early Homo.
So scientifically, Carlos, how would they possibly get here in North America?
Well, we know that the Bering Land Bridge, as right now with climate change, whether it's human caused or not, the planet undergoes times where the climate gets colder and the climate gets warmer. When the climate gets colder, the ocean water gets trapped in ice. When that happens, the water levels go down, and you end up with land that was underwater coming closer to the surface or surfacing. And so it makes it easier to take, boats or some kind of sailing, rafting type equipment from one to another, or simply to walk across. And we know that the Bering Land Bridge going from Russia to over into Alaska has undergone that a number of times, the most recent of which we know was around 12,500 years ago.
So here's a question for you. I'm sorry. So Gigantopithecus, he was a big animal.
10 feet tall.
10 feet tall.
10 feet tall, and possibly bipedal.
Just from the jaw fossils, are we able to determine whether or not he was bipedal?
Dr. Krantz did a reconstruction on this individual. And when you extend back to the ascending rami, which are the two parts of the jawbone that connect up into your skull, where some people get TMJ.
Yeah.
When you reconstruct that, then he was able to, and I believe even since then, Dr. Meldrum, I know I've seen up by about Dr. Meldrum's office, he has a full reconstruction of the full body of a Gigantopithecus. But because of the placement and the width of that jaw, Dr. Krantz hypothesized that that they stood erect, because that would allow for the throat and everything to drop below and not to have to come forward. And so again, without having the top of the skull to see where the foramen magnum, which is where your spinal cord goes in, to see exactly how that's placed, we don't know for sure. But I know that Dr. Krantz was of the impression, as well as many other physical anthropologists, that the evidence from those jaw bones was enough to indicate that it was likely that they were bipedal.
So do you think they were what they call quadrupeds? So sometimes they would get down on all fours, or what's the research say?
The crazy part for me is I've only seen in the encounters that I've had with this unknown modern specimen, I've had one encounter where it had to have either been down on all fours or on its belly, but I believe it was in either a push-up type position or on its knees and hands doing one of these jobs. But I mean, we don't have any ecological evidence from what they were doing. And we do have from their dentition, phytoliths, these little microscopic pieces of evidence from the fossil teeth that show us what their diet was. So we know that they were mostly vegetarian, but their teeth are shaped in such a way that we also believe they were probably omnivorous, just like bears and just like ourselves.
Okay. So
dentition tells a lot about an organism, but I couldn't tell you more about if it walked on all fours or not. Quadrupeds are typically terrestrial bound creatures. This was a large, ape. So I'm sure it was mostly terrestrial. I don't believe that Southeast Asia, I don't think that the bamboo trees could support something that large climbing up and through it. But I don't know. I really don't know. I doubt it though.
Gotcha. So one of the other theories, and again, it could be something that we just haven't discovered yet either. What some feel. I know there's some individuals and groups that think it could possibly be Paranthropus. Do you want to discuss a little bit about that as well?
Yeah, like maybe you should explain to everybody the Paranthropus. What is that?
Pardon me.
Yeah, take your time.
So at the time, again, when I was after undergraduate school, went to graduate school at Washington State under Dr. Krantz, and he wanted me to do my thesis on Gigantopithecus because that's the model that he had created from the jaw, and that's all I knew at the time, even with the research that I had done. There were some other people presenting some different ideas that maybe it was a Homo erectus at the Harrison Hot Springs Sasquatch days, but personally, their arguments were tenuous to me at best, because again, the physical evidence is what you have to base it on. Paranthropus. Now, the additional fossil evidence that we've gotten since that time, because remember, I was a grad student of his in the mid '90s, and more fossils have been uncovered, and more evidence has been gleaned from those fossils. The first time I heard of Paranthropus, as a possible
say that 10 times in a row.
Right, fast at the end of a workday. The first time I'd heard Paranthropus was from actually one of the members of the Bigfoot Field Researchers Organization, who had put together. I hope it's okay for me to say this. You know what? I won't say any names because I know that he showed it to me confidentially. And then within a month of him showing me that, and again, I don't think that I just think it was independent. I think he came up with this idea. And then I also know that Dr. Meldrum, because I saw Dr. Meldrum's talk in Spokane that year. And so that opened up a new, possibility for me even to go back and try to find the journals and try to see where they're coming up with the conclusions that they were in terms of the size of Paranthropus, or the possibility that Paranthropus could have sized up. And that's something that I've been thinking about a lot more since, half of my life ago.
Because Carlos, can you just give our average viewer some information about Paranthropus, like size,
Time.
Well, I
You
mean,
know,
time frame.
Paranthropus was robust, and so there were basically in human evolution, we've got two types of forms of our cousins that have either died out or continue to exist. Especially when we're looking specifically not at the bush, the bushier parts of the tree, but the stuff that we know is us or likely closely related to us. You've got gracile and robust forms. Gracile forms basically mean that those fossils look like more slender, more think of the right way to say it. Robust is they've got thicker bones,
like a Neanderthal.
Like Neanderthals were very robust
Right.
creatures. Australopithecus afarensis versus Australopithecus robustus. The robustus is in there, meaning that when you look at those two skulls, one of them looks like it's got more muscle attachment points. So this thing was probably beefier, if that puts it in a term that most of the people in the audience understand. Sorry for my anthropologists out there, because I'm a little nervous today trying to explain this. But Paranthropus had the potential because it was a little bit more robust. But there weren't. The thing about Gigantopithecus is that, again, the scientists believe that thing was already the size of what people see in terms of big feet, Bigfoot. Whereas with Paranthropus, there weren't any Paranthropus skeletons or skeletal evidence, fossil evidence that suggests that they were 7 or 10 feet tall.
Because they were like 3 feet, 4 feet tall?
Or 5, yeah. I think they were,
Yeah, they were pretty average sized for the hominids that were running around at the time.
Right.
So, but the thing is, it doesn't take much in evolution for things to get bigger. Let me give you the example of modern day beavers and ground sloths. When the Bering Land Bridge existed, just 12,500, and you go back 40,000 years when that bridge also existed, the fossils that they find of beavers were the size of Volkswagens. The fossils that they find of ground sloths that barely exist anymore, down in Central and South America, were again the size of vehicles. So things can size up when the environment's right, when there's enough resources for them. So the argument, I believe, the hypothesis is that perhaps Paranthropus ended up in resource-rich environments and therefore could have become the modern-day Bigfoot. And so I'm not opposed to that idea. Again, I need to do my due diligence and read some more of the journal articles that Dr. Meldrum and again, at least one of my cohorts in the Bigfoot Field Researchers Organization have come to that conclusion. I don't know that they feel that conclusion's more or less valid than Gigantopithecus. I think that what the argument is in the Bigfoot community, to simplify it now, again, this is something that I was doing back in the 90s. Now there's these camps in the Bigfoot community. I think it's the argument of, is it an ape or is it a human or hominoid? Is it more like an ape or is it more like us? And, I certainly, at this point, I'm open to the probability that it's more like us.
Okay. So how did you meet Dr. Grover Krantz? And while you're explaining that, I'll probably pull a couple of images up onto for the viewing audience. We do have a podcast audience as well.
Well, my senior year at Pomona, I flew up to Washington State to interview him for my undergraduate project to finish my wasn't really a thesis. It was a project on Gigantopithecus and Bigfoot. And so when I went up to interview him in Pullman, I was also at that time, I had just read his book you showed one of his books a minute ago up there, the Bigfoot Sasquatch evidence. He had written a book called Big Footprints. And in that book, I had a whole bunch of questions because that book must have come out in 89 or 88, or I'm sorry, pardon me, 93 or 94, because that was my senior year. And I know that I'd recently read that book and I wanted to go and interview and ask him questions about, his thoughts on everything from, Osterman to some of these individuals that are still in the media spotlight, if you will, for things that he either thought were good evidence or Dr. Krantz, didn't believe were good evidence, believed that the people behind some of the evidence were hoaxers, based on his own personal experience, checking their tracks. Because I know for a fact that he did not publish everything he knew about the footprints, all the details. And he tested me. He said, what is missing? What am I not telling people? And he had hundreds of casts. And I looked at those casts day after day, year after year, when I wasn't, taking a class or prepping for a class. So I think I lost my train of thought.
No, I think it's important that you mention the footprints, because again, I'm going to bring it back to like the average person, not the people who are really involved in the world of Bigfoot, just your average person who are like, there are footprints out there that are not fake, that not even a podiatrist could fake. There's like deformities, there's dermal ridges, there's all kind of things that are going on. And I think that's the thing that I really want to try to connect to, like the average person, is that yes, there are some footprints that are fake. Okay, whatever. But there are ones that go for miles and miles and miles. And there are ones that have dermal ridges and, like I said before, irregularities and diseases. There are footprints out there that's the evidence.
Well, and there are footprints out there that show an individual in an area over time. I mean, Peter Byrne, I'm sure, and he's in your book. He's one of the 4 Horsemen. I mean, he was one of the first that I remember documenting footprints from a given area that showed growth of an individual that still had the same unique features, but was just getting bigger.
Like a fingerprint.
Just like a fingerprint.
Just like a fingerprint.
Of course, one of the other horsemen from Canada, Rene Dehinden, was involved in the Bosberg, I think it was Bosberg tracks with the cripple foot.
The cripple foot, yep.
Where there was a series of tracks where one foot left a normal, undisturbed. In fact, Dr. Krantz reconstructed the broken foot to show how the bones, and he talked about the type of injury. It wasn't a book public. He had it in his book, but I know that he wrote a paper about that specifically. And when he did the reconstruction then of just like the behind me, the Patterson film trackway, he took one of those tracks and reconstructed what the bones, how the bones would have to sit and how the ankle would be different than ours to leave the imprint. Again, a hoaxer, there are hoaxers. There will always be people that, try to get over on other people for whatever reason. I mean, just like there are trolls online. There'll always be people that are going to want to hate and tear down rather than build up a body of knowledge. So I appreciate it.
There's just certain things that you can't hoax.
And again, Dr. Krantz, I know, went to his grave having never seen one himself, but he knew these creatures were out there just based on
the
that
footprints,
physical evidence left behind. Now, again, I believe he probably was convinced that Gigantopithecus was the ancestor. I'm not at this point. I'm not convinced, but I'm not.
So which way do you lean?
Well, again, I lean fossil-wise. I lean that it's a hominoid. It's something like us. I mean, the DNA that's been found over and over again, including when I was a student of Dr. Krantz, the early DNA tests that we ran back then in the mid-90s that we got, and that came back as part of the human family, distinct from humans, related to gorillas and orangutans and chimps and humans, but distinct from all. The number of times we got that back on hair samples that he retrieved or I retrieved or that were sent in, and then watching, the whole, currently my business partner on the mountain, and the subject of my first volume of my documentary, Bigfoot Buried My Gun, Kurt Stewart sent hair in to Melba Ketchum. He was one of the sources of that hair.
I didn't know
I've collected hair up there. There's currently 2 trees that I've got to go up and spend at least 2 days pulling hair off of because there's so much hair. A lot of it's bare. There's no question. But I get hair that's not bare. I get hair that doesn't physically, just looking at it under a light microscope, there's no other creature than a sea lion if it was flapping itself up against some of these trees up in the mountains, which it's unlikely, more than unlikely, that that's the case. So beyond the footprint evidence, there is a lot of other evidence that, again, in modern science, modern biology, molecular biology, and genetics don't add up. And
also, I mean, I guess I've heard, again, I'm not a scientist.
Don't add up. Let me finish that thought then. Don't add up to hoaxing. Don't add up to hoaxing. Add up to something left this DNA behind. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Oh, that's okay. Yeah, I'm glad you finished. So isn't it true that maybe we've only discovered 2% of, what existed in the fossil record?
Oh yeah, I mean the fossil record is incomplete, and then again, that's something that non-science minds, or what I dislike the most, scientific people they'll pounce on, one outlying piece of evidence. We know we don't have all the answers. That's why evolution is a theory. That's why a lot of the things in science are theories. We want those theories to be focused, laser focused. If new evidence comes along that contradicts that, then we change. That's the nice thing about science. Science isn't inflexible. Science is about being able to look at new data and reinterpret it. In politics, they would call you a flip-flopper. But that's the nature of science. The nature of science is new evidence dictates you must change your paradigm if the evidence doesn't add up and equal what your thinking was before. And so there's a lot of paradigm shifting that is going on, and I think will continue to go on, not just in this field, but in all of science. And so that's a key point that I want to make sure that I get across the audience, is that science is a methodology. It is not set in stone. The things that you should do, there are procedures, there's a methodology that should be followed as best as you can. And when you can't, admit it, and say it, so that other scientists then, when they try to repeat it, know if they're doing it exactly the way you did it or not, if they're doing something different, or that they can try something different.
So, hey, Carlos, I have a question for you. So we're talking about all of this history and anthropology and Gigantopithecus and Parampicus and the whole thing. So, I mean, was Gigantopithecus a hominoid?
No.
Because what distinguishes as hominoid between any other kind of primate?
When you look at the suite of all the information about a skeleton, for instance, a fossil, let's be specific. A fossil skeleton is modern. When you look at a fossil, which is the mineralized traces of bone left behind by former organisms, or you could have, there's different kinds of fossils, but when we're talking about this argument, we're looking at bones. We're looking at bones and teeth. And so when you add up the body of bones and teeth that scientists agree belong to X, species X versus species Y, then that suite of traits that they're looking at determines whether or not they believe it's more ape-like versus more human-like.
Okay,
and
so human-like would be hominoid.
Hominoid, but again, the great apes are apes, and they are anthropoids, but they're, as you get into the chimpanzees, yes, we still call them apes because of the way our paradigm currently is, but they have 99.7% DNA the same with us. When they're doing these tests on Bigfoot, alleged Bigfoot DNA, no matter who it is that's doing them, they don't know what they're looking for until you take a known sample of that DNA and you run every nucleotide. You're never going to have anything good to compare it to. It's going to good samples are going to continue to come back as human, because
what are the characteristics of a hominoid?
Characteristics
as
of a
opposed
hominoid?
To an ape.
Hominoids make their own tools.
Okay.
Hominoids make fire. All primates have stereoscopic vision.
But I mean hominoids, are all hominoids bipedal?
Are all hominoids bipedal? Yes. Anything that we would consider part of our line. And that's why it's really important when they go back and they look at these fossils. If they determine that they're bipedal, then that begs that further splitting question. Well, how can you have this Gigantopithecus that's bipedal if it's an ape? And so again, you're looking at
maybe like a crossover, like something that's crossing over from ape into a hominoid, possibly.
And that's just it. I mean, in modern times, we see currently troops of some of the great apes that are developing some of these things that science currently uses to define us as human. They're creating their own tools. They're learning from the nearby villagers and creating spears to get fish, sponges to leaves as sponges. And then the question is, are they just manipulating or are they actually creating? And so again, within the deepest layers of the sciences, you get these arguments, and then you end up with these camps these are important arguments to have to determine, well, what makes us human? and it should be scientific. That answer should be something that we can measure and observe in a fossil or in a modern specimen. To my point, the reason I'm leaning that these are a hominoid, for me, it comes down to the DNA at this point. I don't think that the DNA hits that we've gotten since the 90s would be putting it so close to us, whereas it would be confusing. I don't think that there's, kind of like with hoaxes, not every footprint out there can be hoaxed. Not every one of these hits that's coming back human can be wrong, especially with the integrity of some of the people that have collected it and it's been collected from. Now, I would like to see better protocols so that anybody who comes across hair would know the right way to get it, so you're not getting any of your DNA on it, and then being able to chain of possession that to the scientists so that it stays that way, so we can say with certainty this was not contaminated. This came from this source. Ideally, of course, to really bring home the bacon for everybody out there, you would see the creature, you'd see it scratch itself on a post, and you would film yourself walking up to that post, collecting that evidence with rubber gloves and a mask on, putting it in a proper container that's not contaminated, sealing it, delivering it on video to the next step. So as close as we can get to that ideal, the better. But I mean, I know that one of the things you wanted me to talk about for the audience was great procedures, right? Good procedures to go out into the woods with. And that's, for me, a big one that I've been pushing in Project Zoo Book and in other groups of citizen scientists, and real scientists, that it would be nice if somebody could publish a set of protocols, scientific protocols that people could follow easily, rubber gloves, mask, agree on plastic or paper in terms of envelopes or plastic tubes, if you find a hair sample, etc. Sorry, I just wanted to inject.
Right. I know there's always that controversy between paper and plastic on when you're grabbing evidence. Actually, that might be, maybe I'll have you do that for book number 2. Maybe I'll have you create that protocol for me. You can add that to the book.
I'd like to be a part of it. I mean, again, I know there's people out there that are collecting just as I am, and it would advance us so much faster if everybody was doing the same thing.
Right. And
then we could get together and say, this isn't working, let's do this instead. But like I said, right now, the biggest thing I'd like to see is some rich philanthropist out there drop the money and get one of these samples that we know, or several scientists can agree, this doesn't look like anything that we know of, that we believe this must be the Sasquatch, run the DNA on it. So then we can have new markers in that small percentage that's different than our DNA to look specifically at those markers and yep, this is a Bigfoot hair. That's what I'd like to see in my lifetime for sure.
So, hey, Carlos, do you think that there would be any reason of any kind of contrast, or anybody who would not want this to be known? Whether it would be in our government, in the world, in our
scientific community,
knowing that there is a bipedal ape that lives in North America or northern Russia or in any other areas.
For everything I said earlier about science and the definition being that it's about change and new information changing, paradigms, which are the overarching big ideas in science, seem to take forever to change. It seems really hard to shake an old paradigm, and that's not to be confused with a theory or a law, just ways of thinking about things, like the first peopling of North America, for instance, that the first peopling was 12,500 years ago. My eventual master's thesis was on the first peopling of North America, had to have been 30,000 or more years. So it had to be an earlier bridge. And what we think is the first peopling was a later migration. But without diverting too much, that paradigm of the 12,500 year mark is an example of something that's really hard to change in the textbooks, and to get the old camp of people who look at new evidence as outliers. Everything's an outlier. But when that evidence starts to mount up, and it's not just one piece of evidence that's an outlier, you've got sites in Virginia, sites in Texas, sites in New Mexico, sites in South America, sites in Central America that are showing these older dates. Now you've got to, again, at some point you reach a tipping point. So science, easy things that aren't controversial, change can change very quickly.
It's not flip-flopping like you said in
No.
politics, or it's literally that as more data comes in, we have more information and can make better evaluations.
Exactly. And so, that the change of paradigm is difficult. But also to create a paradigm, a creature such as this, and to get back to your not a creature, but these creatures being out there, these beings, whatever you want to call them, being out there in the wild all over the world, seen in most states, in all over North and South America for sure, and throughout the old world. The fact that there's mythology, the fact that there are First Peoples and Native peoples and hunting, gathering peoples' beliefs and stories of these beings, and the fact that people today are seeing them, whether it's a blob squatch that they catch on their cell phone or not, that you've seen something with your naked eyes. That you've heard something with your ears that doesn't add up to anything known. When you hear one of these things, if you hear it close enough, I guarantee you won't think that it's anything but a Bigfoot or something like a Bigfoot. So I don't know if I answered your question. Oh, you were asking about like cover-ups.
Yeah.
I don't think that there's.
That's a good way to say it.
Thank you.
I don't think that there's. I think that I can sit here and go on 100 podcasts and put stuff out can make movies. Nobody's going to care at that level to get interested in anything I'm doing unless I end up with a body. If I have a body, or if I have a living creature in a cage somehow, I think then possibly, but I don't know. I've never had.
So here's a question for you, Carlos. You're out hiking in Northern California where you live, and you're just like chilling, you're having a great time, and blah, blah, blah. You're walking, and all of a sudden, boom, you look down and there is a dead Sasquatch.
I'd be documenting everything about it.
Wait. What do you do? What's the first thing that you do? Do you call 911? What do you do?
I've given this a lot of thought.
Yeah.
And this goes back to the time of Dr. Krantz, because when I was his student, John Green, all these guys were of the opinion the only way we're going to prove, if that's the important outcome, prove the existence is to get a body. And so he was all for shooting one. If I came across the body, because I would not shoot one, if I came across the body, this was the other thing that we discussed many a day before class in his office. Dr. Krantz and I talked about all the different things. And one of the things he told me to make sure absolutely that I had in my pack was a hacksaw. He said, you're not going to be able to carry, if you find even a young one, he said, and his words were, take the head if you can, take a hand, or take a foot. If you can get all three, great. He says, but if you come across one of these in the most likely manner, which is the manner you just described, then bring something that science will be able to do something with. Now, to answer your question,
who would you tell, Carlos?
I have a short list in my mind.
Okay. You don't have to tell us who it is.
Well, I'll tell you this.
You have a short list.
My short list would involve serious scientists, and what I would try to do in that circumstance, again, if I could manage carrying the weight, I would try to bring back enough of those pieces to send to at least 3 to 5 other scientists. And when I say send to them, deliver to them myself personally, not pick up a phone, not talk about it around my Siri or anything else.
Yeah.
Because I know the weird ads and things that pop up. Somebody is always listening. I don't know who. And again, I'm not going to sit here and tell you that I think that there's a government conspiracy or not. I don't know. I know enough people have had unusual encounters with people of authority that have come around when there's been some real evidence, a body of some sort. One's claimed allegedly been hit, shot, these types of things. So I've never shot one. I've never hit one. I don't intend to. But to answer your question, if I were to find one in the woods that I know is dead and not living, I would dismember it as best I could, just as though if I had just taken an animal, in hunting season. I would try to field dress it and take as much as I could. But in this case, instead of field dressing, I would just try to get the most anatomically pertinent pieces. And then I would try to go, obviously, I would try to get those into somebody else's hands. And then I would try to get back or send someone back to the location to try to get the rest. And then once I knew that I had personally delivered those pieces to those scientists, then I might put something out publicly.
Right.
But I would not start with a public campaign if I were to find
or calling the authorities.
That golden star evidence, because I just know enough in my life that I don't try. It's X-Files, a cliche, but I trust no one. Trust no one.
Right.
But I know that, again, I know what I've seen, I know what I've experienced, and I know that literally the truth is out there. It's in these woods. But it's certainly, not coming by my house and saying, okay, you ready? Take some pictures. Let's go in. I'll come in your garage. Run some tests on me. We don't have that kind of. I don't have that kind of relationship with this phenomenon. I wish I did. I mean, if I was the chosen one, I would love to be that person. But I think I'm like most other people out there. I've seen something that I can't explain, and some people bury their heads after that happens. Some people pretend like they never saw anything, especially like two hunters together. One of them sees it, wants to talk about it. The other one doesn't want to say anything to anybody. Yeah. I was that way as a kid, but I'm not that way anymore. But again, to the point where I want to learn as much as I can. I'm more curious now than ever. That first encounter, I smelled them. I never smelled them again, but I've heard them. I've seen them again. I've seen them in the daylight now. We were just filming the movie that's coming out hopefully before the end of this year, and I'll talk to you about that another time. But
no. Let's talk about it now.
Let's talk about it now, Carter. We're in the editing phases, so I don't know what's going to.
We want to talk about it now.
I don't know what's going to make the cut or not, but I'll say this:
it's going to make the cut.
We filmed on location, Chronicles of Carlos, and
that's
through
so cool
Indiegogo campaign that we did. We raised about $11,000 to film the first volume, which is going to go out as a documentary, but then we're also going to try to edit it down to about a 45-minute proof of concept is what they call it. Those documentaries that then they might turn into like a show, like Expedition Bigfoot or the Secret of Skinwalker Ranch or any number of shows like that, Finding Bigfoot. So that's the goal. That's actually a shot laying in the camp, looking up at the trees. I took that picture. Not during that shot was taken when I put game cameras up about 2 weeks before we went up there to film, because the incident had happened 25 years before in this hidden valley. And
so I'm gonna have you pause. Can you go back and explain? Tell the audience again the name of your documentary and the background of it.
Okay, so 3 years ago, you're asking for some background, so I'm going to give a little bit more than just that. 3 years ago, my girlfriend and I, Renee, were in lower state New York, across the border from Pennsylvania, when I heard them again. Heard them for the first time and had an encounter with her. And she rolled her window down. She wouldn't get out of the car, but she heard one of them. And so it had been 20 some years since my previous encounter. It's not like I go out every time I'm in the woods, I see a Bigfoot, but we had another weird encounter that I was able to record, and it affected me. It got me going again. So for the last few years, I've created a website and created this concept of Chronicles of Carlos, because I've had multiple encounters, and I know a lot of other people that now, I've interviewed or talked to that have also had experiences with something that I would categorize as part of this phenomenon. So with that, one of my goals is, like you, eventually write a book about it all. But in the meantime, I wanted to get a documentary going after I met Kirk Stewart up here locally, and we bought a house, and I'm 20 minutes away from the guy. So we started, he took me out and started showing me the places and allowing me to take, hair samples off of his property, set up game cameras on his property. And then he started to take me to some of the places where he's had them on or near his property over the last 20 years. He's off grid, and some of the evidence that he had was very good. I'm still hoping that I'm going to be able to get a good footprint, and cast it and some of the other evidence that he's seen and photographed over the years. But like I said, with that, then I asked him, I said, well, can I do, I wanted to do a movie, a documentary about, the things that I've experienced, but I really would like have you in it. And that's when, once I got the director through Indiegogo, we started, a fundraising campaign to try to go out and get some equipment and to go out and film a movie and pay to get it produced and whatnot. But Chris Neri out of USC is going to be directing and editing, primary editor. It's a very small
USC
budget. Yeah, he went to University of Southern California.
Okay.
Film school, which is one of the very good film schools. And so, this first film, and being a teacher, didn't really have a big budget to, bring in, a top dog. There's some other people that I would love to, work with down the line, but Chris was, he was something else. I mean, he got out there in the woods with us, and we took him remote. I mean, we bushwhacked and no tents, sleeping on the ground, very buggy because it had been a really wet early summer. Mm-hmm. So the mosquitoes were just eating us alive. And he was amazing. I'm looking forward to, getting through these rough cuts to get the final edit. But ultimately, Kirk agreed, and he took us and showed us this place where a Sasquatch, not to give everything away from the movie, but something was, he was hearing things from the hills, and something, when he was out and came back into the valley, had taken his gun and moved it and covered it with detritus and things a good 40 yards away from where he had left it leaning in a nook of a tree. And it was amazing, first of all, that, when you go back to a place 25 years later, a lot of things have changed. But we were able to find like a lot of his original meal sack was there, torn up by bears, but the remnants were there. We found he had left some metal grills up there because he was using it as a hunting camp at the time. Okay. Where he would go up and stay, and the way they hunt up here isn't like back in Pennsylvania, where we go out in the morning, and drive the deer during the day and then take coffee break at midday. They stay out there. I mean, these guys will go out and they'll just stay for days till they pack out their meat. So that was a whole new experience for me and for the director, sleeping out literally feet away from bear dens to film this movie. It was very exciting. And I really hope that you and the audience get a chance to take a look at it and so like what we put together.
So, hey, Carlos, when do you expect this movie to be like released? This is my birthday week, and I asked him to really try to have something to me by this week, but he's so within the next couple of weeks.
Well, the edits will be in the next couple of weeks, and I've got to do some more voiceovers. In fact, Tuesday this week, I'm hiking one last time before the snow starts up to the film site to try to get some additional drone footage, because another tip for people that want to go out and try to, do some citizen science on this phenomenon. Take with you what you think you'd like to see. If you want to see pictures, take good cameras. If you want to see, if you want to see better footprints, take plaster with you and hike with that stuff. But know this, you can't take it all. We hiked in as much as we could. We actually hiked in. We had to leave a bag of stuff hanging from a tree that I'm going to hike back in and try to get.
Or later, right?
We couldn't. It was just with all the film equipment, we just simply couldn't bring it all back. But know that everything weighs something. But also not everything's going to work. We didn't have the weirdness of batteries going and draining on us, but we wanted drone footage up there, and the drone wouldn't work. His drone had to be synced with his computer, and he couldn't do it. I have a drone, and I'm going to be testing it. I've tested it here. I'm going to give it a shot because we really want to have some aerial footage for the movie. All the footage we have is good footage and good cuts, but we want to have a couple of those, like that picture you showed earlier, looking up. It'd be good to have some looking down into this valley so that people can get an idea of its kind of remoteness and its ruggedness.
Well, Carlos, as expected, I knew I was only going to get to about a third or maybe half of what we want to talk to you about. So we're definitely going to have you back.
So why don't you tell the audience how they can keep up with you?
Well, I mean, if they're interested in the stuff that I've done, I've been, I started working again, so I haven't been posting a whole lot, but I do intend on getting back to regular postings to my social media.
When you say posting, are you talking about like Facebook posting?
I'm on Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, YouTube, but I haven't done a whole lot. They can just find you
with your name?
Chronicles of Carlos. Chronicles of
Carlos. Okay, cool.
And again, I chose that just because I was looking for alliteration, something with my name, C, and stories, Stories of Carlos doesn't have that alliteration.
Right.
I like
It's
Chronicles
great,
of
yeah.
Carlos. It
It
kind
was
of
also an
flows.
homage, though, to the Sasquatch Chronicles. I taught
Love
the West
it.
up in Vernal, Utah, a couple weeks ago at the Phenomenon, and I told him, I said, look, truth be told, I started listening to podcasts because, again, since the time of Krantz, I hadn't been out of the loop. I hadn't been doing anything Bigfoot related. We didn't get to that, but I almost died, and so almost dying in your mid-20s changes the direction of your Indiana Jones adventures. And I became a teacher and a coach. But I can tell you about that another time. So
Yeah,
at any rate,
that was on my list that we didn't get to today.
but the long and the short of it is that, that's I don't know. The long and the short
Well,
of it
I
is
just have to say, Carlos, this was an amazing conversation because normally we kind of stick to the script and we have questions, and sometimes it's a little bit of a struggle to get people to talk, but you have been like the perfect dinner party guest who just like offers so many interesting stories and so much information. So it's been like a breeze to have you.
Well, I'm humbled. Thank you.
Next time you're on the Eastern Shore, we're going to have you over for dinner. You can tell some more stories.
I've only ever been to Rehoboth Beach with.
That's where we live. That's my
where
hometown.
my best, one of my best buddies from college, Alex Condrell, he had a.
Oh my God. What year did he go to Cape Henlopen High School?
What's that?
Did he go to Cape Henlopen High School?
No, he visited there because that's where his Nuno. I think if I'm probably saying them totally wrong, but he's Greek, and I remember that's like where his grandmother.
Oh, okay, cool.
And he took me there when we were in college to visit. But yeah, I look forward to having you show me around Delaware because all I ever saw was the beach.
Yeah, I mean, well, that's kind of where we are.
Yeah. But Carlos, thank you again.
Thank you so
amazing.
much, Carlos. You rock.
And thanks for the help with the book. You wrote the foreword. Everyone check the book out. So we'll chat real soon. We got to get part 2 for this
You're
interview.
Coming back, Carlos.
I'd be happy to, especially once the movie's out. I can talk more about that.
100%. Thank you, Carlos.
Thank you, guys.
All right.
Thank you.
Oh my God, Carlos was so cool.
That was fun. It went so fast.
Oh my God. Yeah. He just he's got so much stuff to share. It was super cool. But, we have to end our show because it's
unfortunately, I could have talked to Carlos for another 2 hours.
God. So we would have been up to like 2:00 in the morning if he was here at the house, but we have to like reel things in. But do we want to talk about how to follow us or?
Sure. Yeah. Real briefly again, because we're running late because we didn't want to. If you guys want to check out Carlos's foreword, he's in a book.
Yeah.
He did an amazing job
in the Bigfoot Influencers book.
You can purchase the book at a bunch of different places. Right now, you can get it at the Sasquatchlegend.com, the International Cryptozoology Museum, North American Bigfoot Museum, and also Hangar One Publishing. And thank you guys. And I'm going to pass it over to you.
Yeah. So if you guys want to continue to follow us, because we love having you here, and we try to like create this rapport of welcoming in new people who are interested in the Bigfoot phenomenon, you can follow us here on YouTube at Untold Radio AM. So please like and subscribe. You can also follow us on Facebook, the Bigfoot Influencers. Instagram, the Bigfoot Influencer, Twitter, the BF Influencers, and our website is thebigfootinfluencers.com. So thank you again, and we look forward to seeing you at the next episode.
Thanks, everyone.
Have a great night.